Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. All right. It is cold out. There was condensation in my beehive. It was 42 degrees this morning when I took my son to the bus stop. It is that time of year that I've been kind of dreading and also a little bit excited for. Um, First off, I want to say thank you to my sponsor, Galena Farms. If you are looking to buy some woodenware, I hope you check out their equipment. Use coupon code Larissa. I will put it in the chat, but it is GALENA farms.com. And the coupon code is Larissa, LARYSSA, and that will give you 5% off. I'm also going to be having a giveaway if anyone wants to dress up like a honeybee for Halloween or has a young child in their life who wants to be a honeybee. We'll be doing that in a little bit. So to qualify for the contest, all I need is for you to put something in the comments, whether it is where you're tuning in from or a question. And both of these costumes are going out to somebody, US only though, for shipping reasons. Here is the adult bee and the child's bee costume, which is valued at over $100. Okay, so we're going to be talking about beekeeping in the fall. I'll talk for those of you in the warm climates as well as you in the colder climates, because it's quite different. It is so different. My mind is blown at how different beekeeping is in Pennsylvania than Hawaii. I bought more sugar this one year than I did all of the 11 years that I kept bees in Hawaii. It is insane. But I was just on the chat with my local bee club, just talking to them because I'm curious about what is the norm to expect and timing and all of those things that, are still kind of difficult to figure out as a beginner newbie in southeastern Pennsylvania. Okay, so the big thing that we're doing right now is feeding bees. And right now, the part that is the most stressful for me, not having a prior schedule for this area, being new to the area, is the timing. Timing is everything in beekeeping. And really the biggest mistake you could make is being too late. So if you're not sure, it's always better to be too early than too late. But timing and managing your Varroa mites, there's a lot of variation in how people prepare their beehive for winter. You can buy Hive Alive fondant. You can make your own candy board. You can just pour a bag of dry white sugar on an inner cover. You can mix water with some vinegar and sugar until it's like wet sand and put it on newspaper. I mean, it's just the variety of ways that people give backup feed to their bees in the cold weather. It's like funny, it's like typical humans. We just have 15 ways to do one thing. But it's really all about making sure you're doing it early enough, not too early, and then also having a healthy hive, because a lot of these stresses and this cold weather, it doesn't really matter how much insulation you have on the hive or screened bottom or insulated inner cover if they're weak. So first, there's feeding bees. Often people will give their bees feed once it gets later in the season, like now. When it's still warmer out, it's still in the 70s and above, even high 60s, we're giving the bees syrup. And that's only if you think they need it. The two main reasons why bees would need syrup right before the cold weather comes on is because either their population is Well, not necessarily the population, but the brood, the amount of brood that's in the hive. So you want at least, like 4 or 5 frames of brood, unless you have like a nuke in the hive. Um, even like 6 or 7 frames of brood, but if you're seeing that the queen isn't laying so much, because, say, there's a lack of food out and your population is dwindling a little bit too fast, then you can give the bees a syrup in the ratio of 1 part water to 1 part sugar and put that into the hive to help, keep the queen laying, and increase that brood production. Um, my hives are pretty good population-wise, but they are struggling when it comes to their stored food. So, I have been putting in, 2 to 1 syrup, which is 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, and putting that inside the beehive, and that's just to bulk up them in terms of weight. Now, there are a lot of beekeepers. If any of you guys have seen my videos in Hawaii or taken my class, you may have noticed that I in Hawaii would want run a deep box and then put all medium boxes above that. And a lot of beekeepers in the colder climates will run 2 deep boxes and mediums above that. And they say that's for preventing your hive from getting full of brood and swarming early in the season. But there are beekeepers that will overwinter a hive in just one brood box with no medium or deep box on top full of honey. Some people will put a medium box full of honey on top of that. Some people will put a deep box full of honey on top of that. If you don't have um enough frames, it really just varies on how much food the bees already have and what's feasible. Ideally, you'd want them to fill that box up. You want that brood box full wall to wall, and you want the box above that full as much as possible. So now is really the time. It's supposed to be in the high 70s, low 80s this weekend. And so this is my weekend to really just open up the hives and see what they have, how much they filled up, how much brood is in there, and figure out if I still need to feed. And maybe I should be taking that extra box off of the hive. Um, I would say that although you want to feed your bees and you want them to have a lot of food, it's not all about just a ton of food for the bees. If you have, like, say, 5 frames of brood, your cluster's looking kind of small there, just in the middle of that one deep box, do not give them a whole nother deep box full of honey, even if you have it, because that is a large cavity that they're going to have to that they're going to be in, that the heat is going to be, they're not trying to heat up the whole cavity, of course. They're clustered up and they're heating up themselves. But if they have this huge cavity, the heat's rising and it's just a lot of wasted energy. So don't give a small cluster. Don't expect to give them 2 deep boxes of honey because that's what people say to do. It's really just about getting a general idea of how big the cluster is, how much food is already in the hive, and what you think will work for the bees. Managing space can be just as important as making sure they have enough food. So you can always feed them 2 to 1 syrup at this time to help encourage them to fill up that box that they're in, that lowermost box, and maybe that box above that. But it is okay if that box above your brood is not a deep, if maybe it's a medium, or your bees are smaller and they're maybe in just one deep box and nothing above it except for candy. Um, I see Jane says we did a check here last week and found 30 drone cells in one of the hives. Why drone cells so late in the season? Yeah, I opened up my hives a week or two ago and there were just a tiny little bit of drone pupa. 30 cells is not a lot. So if you were seeing a frame or a quarter of a frame, um, but those drone cells, that's 28 days till they hatch. So the queen laid them, like almost a month ago. So a month ago, it was considerably warmer out, and so there might have still been a good amount of food coming in, and so they might have just been one of the last little bit. I'm still seeing drones, flying around, though I don't think they'll be around much longer. Um, so that's the thing about feeding. Mm, You want to take the syrup out before it gets too cold. Um, for us here, late October, it's already getting cold enough that you should have that out. You take out the liquid syrup, you close up the hive, you stop bothering them really because they are starting to put propolis everywhere and really seal it up. So you want to give them time to be able to seal up all those cracks and crevices while it's still warm enough for them to break that cluster. And of course, like it's going down, it's getting in the 40s in the evening, but it's still going back up to the high 70s once in a while. And so once you start to see that first cold day and then it warms up again, you take that warm day after those cold days and you take that as a sign that that is your little pocket to get everything sealed up. Take that syrup out before it's too late, before you have liquid dripping onto a cluster and creating extra moisture in the hive. Start putting everything together to the way it should be so the bees can propolize it. I have entrance reducers already on my hive. My one hive, they actually already blocked up a quarter of the entrance with propolis already, all on their own. Um, but mouse guards are not really necessary yet because it's not at those temperatures where it's too cold for the bees to chase the mice out of the hive in the daytime. For those of you in the warmer climates, you do not have to worry about this. Most likely, maybe the Brazilian pepper tree has ended and it's the end of your nectar flow. But when I was in Hawaii, I never fed my bees, like ever. I never did it. It's not good for them. It's not good for their health. Um, it's not good for their digestion. So, unless you really need to, because you're afraid of them starving, or you just got a hive and you have a somewhat shortish season for them to grow, you just bought a package and they have no food, you don't need to feed your bees. So, I strongly recommend to the people that don't have any kind of frost or it's not getting below 60 in the daytime to not feed your bees unless you really have a reason to. Save yourself the money and don't bother with it. Now, supplements like Honeybee Healthy, it's mostly like lemongrass oil to help attract the bees to the syrup, which is not, I found, not necessary whatsoever. They find it just fine and are very happy about it, and you don't need to attract them to it. It also has essential oils to keep it from spoiling, which is important in the warmer weather. But now that it's cool enough out, and the bees are drinking it so fast, it is not, there's no point to really putting that into your syrup right now, unless it's warm out or your bees aren't taking the syrup that fast, because syrup has a shelf life of about a week. You don't want moldy syrup inside your beehive. um, so that's not necessary. Some people will add a little bit of pollen or amino boost. That is up to you. I don't, because I don't really have a good reason to. Um, there seems to be a ton of pollen coming into the hive, or was these last few weeks on the bees, and I'm not really trying to encourage brood production really at this point. So I don't see the point to it. If anything, you would be starting to feed the bees pollen come like February-ish when the queen starts laying again. 4 to 6 weeks before really that, uh, the nectar flow starts and it's really warm enough for the bees to be actively coming and going from the hive. Let's see. So, um, once you're ready to prepare your hive for winter, it's getting cooler out, but you haven't had a frost yet. It's still, the bees cluster up. They start to form that loose cluster around like 55, 58 Fahrenheit. So once it is well above that, that's when you want to make sure that everything is set up for the hive and the order it should be in. The brood is down below, it's on the bottom board that you want, and you have your feet up above that. Um, and that's when people will put candy, fondant, dry white sugar. There's a variety of things you can do. You can make a candy board. The bee club I'm a member of, they buy them in bulk and they distribute them. You can buy Hive Alive fondant. You can buy fondant from beekeeping supply sites. If you make it yourself, just Google. There's a variety of recipes. Either people are adding just a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of honeybee healthy to it, which I believe is just to keep it from spoiling. And then that can also absorb condensation that might drip off of your inner cover or your insulation, depending on if you have an inner cover and where that might be. And then also just, it absorbs that moisture. So it makes it easier for the bees to consume this hard candy and can also put a little bit an extra layer of protection for that cluster so that the condensation is not dripping onto them. So real fast before I go on to the next topic, I just want to see if anyone has questions about feeding their bees this time of year. It's 80 right now, feels like 84 for the weather people and 90 to us Floridians. Another person from Florida, Jim from Connecticut, Denver, Maine, Florida. Kelly says, what if you have a lot of honey? Should I take some frames out for the queen to lay more brood, or will they do that themselves? Well, it first depends on where you live. So if you could give us a little bit of background and tell me where you live and about like what the temperatures are right now. But if there is nowhere for the queen to lay, but she should be laying at this time, then that is a problem. You can. That's a little tricky. Are you sure there are like no frames that have like anywhere for her to lay? Because if you do have empty frames somewhere, you can like move the frames around a little bit so that you are putting them where the brood is, so the queen has somewhere to lay. But Cincinnati, Ohio. Yeah, you are getting to the point that you are going to have very little brood present. So I wouldn't mess around with the hive too much because it is very possible that the bees are just moving their food around so that they have it where they need it. I would not worry about the queen needing somewhere to lay, especially if you are not feeding them. If you're not feeding them, then I would only harvest the excess that you think they don't need. So it really depends on how many frames of brood you're seeing. And if you're on the low side, like 3 or 4 frames, then you might just want to leave them in that box and you can take the excess and harvest that. If you're seeing more like 5, 6, 7 frames of brood, then maybe you're going to want to leave them like a medium box full of honey. Or if it's deep frames that you have of honey, then leave the deep frames in the box above it full of honey and then take the excess. You don't want 3 boxes of honey, but it really depends on what kind of frames your honey is on. And then harvest the rest. I would not harvest honey and put wet empty frames in your beehive come early October in Ohio because I think that your queen is just like starting to stop laying, and I wouldn't go messing around with how they have their hive set up. Um, but you also just have to do what feels right to you when you're looking at the hive and based off of the temperature. But they're not going to like swarm right now. And if they have a good population, I wouldn't really worry about it. Andy says, Andy from New York, being new to this, you're saying to check the boxes this week and check for brood and figure out how much honey is there. Maybe need to feed. That's correct. If you have not treated in the summer, or like late summer, then the primary concern would be putting a treatment in, or the very least doing a mite test first and then putting in a treatment. But assuming that you had a treatment schedule and you've done a mite test within the last month and all of that is under control, then yes, you are going to look to see if there is brood, how much, and where the honey is, and how much honey you're going to be leaving your bees and taking off excess, figuring out whether you should be feeding them some heavy syrup to help bulk up the hive. Meredith says, is it necessary to feed bees during a dearth? Is it true there can be flowers but little nectar? It is not necessary to feed bees during a dearth. I never did in Hawaii, and there were quite a few robbing seasons. I've seen bees stinging each other and dead drones outside the hive. Feeding your bees during a dearth can cause quite a bit of problems. It can cause a lot of robbing within the hive, especially if you are putting in attractant like honeybee healthy or something with lemongrass oil like that, amino boost, things of that sort. Now, I'm just saying honeybee healthy because that's what I buy. I don't have like an issue with honeybee healthy. It is a great product. I've used it for many years. I have it in my refrigerator at the moment. There's just a time to use it and a time to not use it. And feeding bees this time of year, or feeding bees during a dearth, can cause problems. And so I never fed my bees in Hawaii because they had enough honey. It really just depends on if your bees have enough honey, because they're supposed to be bringing in excess to handle times of scarcity. And so, especially in warm climates, you leave them some excess for the times when there's not a lot of food coming in. And so in Hawaii, I would harvest in, September. And then they didn't bring much in all the way until February. And so it was a tricky time when you want to leave them enough food that they're not starving, but not, want to take too much so that you have to feed them, but you just don't want to leave them too much food that they start to have infestations of wax moth and small hive beetle. But you really don't want feeding to be this like common practice thing you always throw in the hive as soon as there's not a lot of flowers blooming, because it's not good for the bees' health and it can lead to robbing. I have some beekeepers will feed their bees outside the hive instead of inside the hive. And I, I'm when bees are in that robbing mode. I mean, numerous times I fed bees some syrup, and I had the pot had just like this little bit of syrup like inside it, and I left it outside for the bees to clean up. And my husband was like, "Is that normal? Why are those two bees stinging this bee?" And there were three bees near the pot outside, like in our backyard, not near the beehives, and two bees were stinging another bee. And he's like, why were they stinging this poor bee? Like, she's not in our beehive. But I will see a lot of dead bees in areas when there's just like syrup left out, and you'll see bees get kind of aggressive with each other. So it's not always a good thing. to feed if you don't have to. You just want to make sure that they have enough food to get them through whatever they're going to be going through in the next few months. So in your first couple of years, you might be a little bit quicker to feed just to make sure that they're not starving. But then after that, you should get a feel for when there's a dearth and then another nectar flow comes, or when there's a dearth, and that means it's the end of the season and not much else is coming until wintertime. Um, Rick Back says 4 weeks ago I had brood and larva. 2 weeks ago, no brood or laying activity. After a cool spell in central Minnesota, um, 1 week ago, added 1-to-1 feed, checked again this week, and still no laying activity. But have you checked to make sure that there is a queen? Uh, because that's sometimes if something happens to the queen, she could fly off when you're inspecting the hive or something. And then there's also a possibility that she is laying, it's just she's laying a minimal amount. And so you're just not seeing it because it, it's just not as obvious as when the hive is really full. So feeding a 1-to-1 is what the beekeeper can do to encourage your queen to lay. If the bees are taking it, then I would continue to do that and see how it goes. But make sure you take it out before it gets too cold out. I don't know when it gets like, because here in Pennsylvania, it'll be taking your feed out within the next 3 weeks. So I would just check to make sure everything's okay because there's no point in overwintering a hive that's queenless. And if she's there and there's still, like pupa and there's still a cluster and a decent population, and there's not really much else you can do, I can think of, other than trying to encourage giving that 1-to-1 feed for the last couple weeks before you close the hive up for winter. Gary says, hope you all checked your hives for honey resources. Does anyone do the 1-2 finger lift from under your front bottom board? It can be done without opening your hive. So Gary's referring to just checking to see how heavy the hive is. I guess it depends on how strong your fingers are. But you're probably not going to be taking out each frame and weighing them on a scale or putting your hive onto a scale. So that is a way to just check to see how heavy your hives are and whether you should be feeding. If you're not sure if they have enough feed on them. Junebug says, is it foragers that utilize internal feeders? I was kind of wondering that myself. I really have no idea. My guess would be yes. They're not leaving the hive to forage, but they're going up there. I mean, because it wouldn't be the nurse bees. I would think that the house bees are mostly just cleaning out the cells and carrying out the dead bodies and debris. There's bees that are propolising the hive. So I was concerned that if I fed my bees too much, the foragers would just be going to the feed instead of leaving the hive to gather real food. That is something that people argue about. I do see quite a bit of activity at the entrance. Uh, but I have also been seeing the bees just flying around our yard. There's I feel like I've seen more activity since the wasp nest has died, since I killed it, because I was seeing wasps attacking bees on flowers. I saw a wasp pick up a bee and like fly away with her. And I saw a wasp jump on a bee and start stinging her on a flower. There's a very little yellow jackets and minimal wasps now in the area. And so I don't know if that's why they're around more or if they're just really desperate and the food that they were going to, they're not seeing much of. But that was something that I was curious about is these internal feeders, who's gathering from them? And if they're gathering from the internal feeders, does that mean that they are not out doing what they would normally be doing outside. Jim says, for people in the upper Midwest, are hive wrappers a good idea? Um, Jim, there's people that wrap their hives uh, in your area and in New York and in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of people that do not. I would say in your area, it's probably not crucial, though I'm not totally sure exactly how cold and windy it gets in your area. Some people are just concerned that when they wrap their hives, it's just creating too much moisture in it. But there are many people that will buy a bee wrap, or they will just take corrugated plastic that is black and put that around the beehive. You just really want to make sure that there's ventilation. You want the bottom entrance, but then a second piece of ventilation would be really good. Whether that is just having a screened bottom with just a little bit of that opened up. Um, you can put a piece of chloroplast on the screened bottom, but just have a little bit of it opened up, or a little bit of an upper entrance, like the notch in your inner cover or something. You do want just moisture to be able to get out, and there to be ventilation if you're going to be wrapping your hives. But people have successfully overwintered with and without the hive wraps. I have one of my bees are in insulated hive, so I'm going to try that because that is pretty much the equivalent of wrapping your hive. I know the people at Better Bee, they are in upstate New York and they wrap their hives. They sell hive wraps, and you can give it a try, but I would just have make sure you have enough ventilation for your hive with the wrap. Our Paradise Farm in Brett, Florida says, do you balance your brood in honey boxes for the winter? Um, Here in Pennsylvania, well, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by balancing your boxes. For the most part, I don't really like swap frames around. I try not to move things around too much. I try not to assume that I know better than the bees, but if I see something that's obviously wrong, I will move it around. Um, but like in the hives, a lot of times in the 10 frame boxes, you'll find the very first and last frame are empty. I If that is the case, I often fill that up with frames of honey if I have them, even though they kept it empty. But I don't go like swapping frames from the top and the bottom and moving brood around and stuff. Usually the bees are pretty good at having the brood in the middle, and then it's pollen, and then it's honey. So sometimes I see pollen on the very outside and the honey before that. I really don't like to move it around too much. I think it sometimes causes more trouble. Uh, and in Hawaii, often the brood, there wasn't much, if any, brood in the second box. In Hawaii, the second box was usually half brood and half honey during the nectar flow, and once the nectar flow ended, it was mostly just brood in the bottom, because the second box was a lot of drones, because they don't use foundation, so they put a lot of drones and a lot of honey in the second box. Just once in a while you have a queen that's just like goes crazy laying, and she just takes over the whole 2 boxes, and you're just like constantly pulling frames out just to keep them from swarming. But other than that, for the most part, I feel like the bees balance their brood and honey boxes out themselves. Gigi's Honeybees says, my queen stopped laying 3 weeks ago. I started one-to-one sugar water. I'm going to check in the morning to see how they are doing. The queen is failing. Shouldn't they supersede her? Yes, they should. I don't believe they always do or can take a while, um, especially if there is no brood. But you do have to make sure that she is there, and it can be hard to spot the brood. So especially like depending on how cold it is and how mm, little food there is. If you started giving them syrup a little bit too late, then and she's already stopped laying, then it might take a little while for her to start up again and for you to be able to see it. And then also it just depends on if you treat it. So a lot of these treatments do make, I mean, the queen just sometimes stops. You can put Apagard in the hive and she can come to a halt. Formic, the things that have those really strong scents. uh, that's why I try not to treat my bees in the spring if I don't have to, because that's when you really want the queen to be laying and you want that brood production. And when you use those treatments, it just it all comes to a halt. So that's another thing to consider is whether you treat it, because if you did, it might be a while before you see her start up again, and it might be a while if you're giving them sugar water. I mean, it's not just like a little switch. It's going to be a gradual thing for her to start laying again. Mike says, I lived in Honolulu for 13 years. Where are you? I lived in Kona on the Big Island, but now I'm in Pennsylvania. um, Rick Beck says, 2 weeks ago, no brood after a cold spell, added feed, and has been hot, but still no laying. Have not seen a queen. Is my hive doomed? I may try to go from 2 to 1 deep as suggested. I would, if it's hot out, then I would definitely do another good thorough search for the queen. So if there is no queen, then yes, the hive is doomed. And if you have another hive, you might want to merge them as soon as possible so that they can join forces. Uh, but if you are not seeing any brood, and it really depends on how many bees there are and how many frames they're taking up. And if there's absolutely no brood, like no pupa or anything, then that's really no good, because that means that there's been no laying for, you know, 3+ weeks. So definitely your populations are going to be going down, and you shouldn't be able to bring that down to just one box. But if there is no queen, then there's no point to overwintering the hive, and you might want to combine them with another one, or just let them wait it out, and the population, the bees will all die off fairly shortly. Jane says, when checking our hives recently, we used a bucket inside the hive. We found numerous dead bees on top of the bucket and maybe a dozen beetles on our Swiffer sheet. Um, use a bucket to to feed? Like, what kind of bucket are we talking about? Like a pail kind of feeder? Um, the bucket is inside the hive. So if there are dead bees on top of your feeder in the hive and they are not drowned, then it sounds like they were trying to rob the hive, uh, is my guess. Uh, if you have a bucket inside the hive, often the bees can't get into that box that the bucket is on. So 1 gallon plastic bucket, like inside the hive with a box around it and a lid on top. And then is there an inner cover to prevent the bees from getting into this box with the bucket? Because if there are dead bees on top, I mean, if it's just a couple bees and then like you take them away and you don't see it again, then it just doesn't matter. It could be a head scratcher, but like it's not really no inner cover. So uh, it sounds like there might be bees that are just robbing, or and they're just fighting each other on the top of this bucket. I would use an inner cover just to separate it from the rest of the hive. So At the very least, you'll be able to figure out a little bit better what's going on. If you still see dead bees in there and you have that inner cover, the only way for the bees to get inside that box then would be for them to sneak through the cover and get in there. And then once they get in there, they're going to be stuck in there and die because they won't be able to figure out how to get out. Because sometimes covers can get a little wonky and there can be a little bit of a space for them to get into the hive through the cover, and they're smelling the syrup and they get in. That would be my guess of why they're dying. Usually when bees die with feeders, it's because they have because it's some way that they're drowning in the liquid. But with those pale feeders and stuff, that's the benefit of them, is that there's really no drowning that's going on, but they can attract robbing. Okay, so do your bees have enough honey? That is a big question, and I found that it can be a little confusing watching more videos about wintertime. You know, I had always read that 35 pounds of honey was good for a good portion of the US. And once you get further north, Pennsylvania is kind of one of those states that's like split in half. Here we aren't, we're like a 2 hour drive to the ocean, and we get snow where I am in Philly, which is an hour west, very little snow. And then you go a few hours west of us, and I mean, like in Pittsburgh they get a ton of snow, and then you go west of that and you're in Ohio and it's even colder. And that seems to be kind of the point at which people are leaving 35 to 50 pounds of honey. Massachusetts, upstate New York, up above that, maybe 50 to 70 pounds of honey. But then there are people that say how much the hive should weigh. And so that is different. There's the weight of the hive, and that is considering that there's the weight of the bees and the wooden equipment and all of that stuff. And there's the actual weight of the honey. And I believe that like a medium frame, when full of honey, it can vary quite a bit, but it's usually like three, they say up to 5 pounds. It could be depending on how fat this frame is with honey. A deep frame full of honey could be like 5 to 7 pounds, is what I read. I have not gone out with a scale and really weighed a lot of these frames. I mean, I did weigh some of my, I've weighed a good portion of my honey frames. When I put 10 frames in my box, they're weighing 3 pounds ish. I have never seen a medium frame weigh 5 pounds. But if you're spacing your frames out, they can get a little bit fatter and it might weigh a little bit more. So there's that. There's weighing your frames versus weighing your hive. And like Gary said, there are easy ways to be able to figure out, can you lift up that beehive with one finger? Do you need two fingers? Do you need three fingers? Are you like me and you're like mumbling curse words under your breath while you're picking up that deep box? That's a good sign. If you're starting to say not nice things under your breath because you don't like lifting heavy things and it's getting to be that point. And it's really the point at which I wish I didn't use two deep boxes on my hives, is this time of year when that box has like no brood in it and it's just food and I'm not happy about picking that box up. That's a good sign. But again, you don't want excess space in your hive. So if you have a small cluster, you might want to put it into a nuke box. If you have two small clusters, you might want to combine them. If you have one small cluster, you might want to combine it with another hive. I have seen on Frederick Dunn's channel, he successfully overwinters nukes. I don't know much about that, but I do know that it can possibly happen. You just want insulation. You want your hive size, the cavity, to reflect the size cluster you have. So if you have a small cluster, you don't need a ton of honey on your hive. Like I said earlier, if you have 5 to 7 frames covered in bees there in your deep box, then yes, put another box on top. If this box is this box going to be a medium or a deep? Well, that kind of depends on you, because at this point, do you have a medium box full of honey or do you have a deep box full of honey? Um, if you have enough deep frames to fill up just one box, then that's what you have. I At this point, there's really not a lot of options, I would say, for most people. You really have to go out there and see what you have. Don't put a whole box on your hive just because you have like one or two frames of honey to put in there. Personally, I would then just put a candy board, a feeder box, whatever you want to call it, full of some kind of candy over that, as opposed to having this big cavernous space and empty frames in it, except for one or two. Um, Lolly says, I'm a first year beekeeper with 2 hives. Each hive has 2 deeps. In the top deep, I have 9 frames of honey and a feeder. Should I remove the feeder? Well, what do you have in the first deep box is a big question. Is Are there just like one or two frames in there? And also, then what kind of winter are you looking at? Because that will dictate how much feed you want to leave them. But it sounds like you probably can remove the feeder. If the first deep is as full as it can be with honey, in addition to the brood, and the second deep is 9 frames of honey, then I mean, you probably can take that feeder off, it sounds like. But you just want to check that first box and make sure that it has honey in it as well. Because if that's empty, then you might want to feed some 2-to-1 syrup in New Jersey. Then yeah, just check that bottom box. If the bottom box is heavy, if it is full, then yeah, I would take the feeder off. And then also, there's just a question of like, are the bees taking the feed? The bees were taking syrup like crazy, very fast, for a week or two, and then they just stopped. Like today, I opened the hive, and all of the hives, their feeders were still like half full. And so they have slowed down a lot when it comes to how much food they are taking. And so some of it is just taking the hint from the bees. So since it's 8:47, there is the last treatment of the year. If you have well, it doesn't really matter if you treat it or not, but this is a good time. It's good to treat before you close your hive up for the winter. Now, there are a lot of beekeepers that do also treat in the winter time. A lot of beekeepers here in Pennsylvania, once it's above 45 degrees Fahrenheit, will use the oxalic acid vaporizer and put it into the beehive. And they prefer to keep the Varroa mite levels low throughout the winter so that they don't have to treat in the springtime and the mite levels are low. That is really up to you, because you don't know your mite levels. You're just taking a guess and keeping them low. But you can also see how it goes. You can also just choose to put a treatment in come springtime. But either way, you should do some kind of treatment at the end of the season. And part of that just depends on what you are using to treat. Oxalic acid is a great treatment this time of year. It's really just a lot of people's go-to when the brood is very low. And so if you choose to use the Varoxan strips, which is oxalic acid, but it's time release strips near in the hive, I believe for 6 weeks. And so if you're going to do that, you really want to put it in like now. You want it in so that you can take them out before they're clustered up. I do not know. I tried to find this answer, whether you can leave them in the hive throughout the winter. I really couldn't find a good definitive answer about that. But my guess would be that you do not want these cardboard strips in the way of the cluster. That's personally how I would prefer to do things. It's not like even Apivar where you put like two strips in the hive or one strip in the hive. You put them just like two frames apart and they extend over two frames. So you want one of those little two strip things for every 2.5 frames of brood, no more than four strips for a full 10 frame box. So I would take them out before it's too cold out that you can't open the box. And the brood is really starting to cluster up. So with those strips, you want to do that sooner. And it's okay that brood's present. So if you're really not sure about timing, then that's a great treatment to use. You can put it in early. You could put it in at the end of September and then take it out, or even mid-September and take it out when it's time. If you are going to use a vaporizer, then that's another great treatment if you're not sure what time, because you can do it once it's too cold to open the hive, once they're already clustered up. And it's a great way to lower varroa mite levels uh, later on, once there's a greater chance that there's little to no brood in the hive. And then you can do it again, say in December or maybe in February, and you're not bothering the bees, and you can use that. You can also use the oxalic acid dribble method, which is a little bit of an in between the strips and the vaporizer. uh, there can be a good amount of user error with using a vaporizer, and so if you want to use that method, the safest way to do it is to get a vaporizer in the springtime and do it for the first time in the spring. So you can just do like a mite count before and after and see how it went. See, do it when like there's you can open the hive, you can put it on shims, you can do what needs to be done. This vaporizer gets hot. There's beeswax is flammable, so you just want to be careful when using that. The dribble method, you do have to open the hive, but it's open for a very brief period of time, and it can be done when the bees are forming a loose cluster. You don't want to do it when it's like 40 degrees outside, but you can do it a little bit later in the year once it is a little bit cooler out. um and one YouTube channel, University of something. They had a great video. So does Better Bee, showing how to use the oxalic acid dribble method. So a little bit less user error with that, and you don't have to put it in so far in advance as with the Varroa sand strips. But you can't do that, like in the middle of winter, like you can with the vaporizer. It is a little bit more intrusive. But those are the primary things that you use to treat. Formic acid is not recommended if you're going into a cold winter because, there are temperature restrictions, but they get pretty low. I think it's like 50, 55 Fahrenheit out. But you don't want to really um, there's a chance your hive can go queenless, and there's nothing you can do about it when the hive goes queenless this time of year. Apiguard also has temperature restrictions, and once it's starting to get cooler out, that the bees are going to be clustered up, even at nighttime, it's not great to be using the treatments that make the bees want to fan the hive down. So that's another reason why formic acid and Apiguard aren't things that you want to use. There's been quite a bit of Varroa resistance to Apivar. So I really do not recommend using this treatment as your final treatment before closing your hive up for a period in which it's too cold for you to open the hive, because it's something you can use in the late summer or in the spring, and then you can put something else in if it doesn't work, but this is not a good time for that treatment. On a side note, I made this tool that I'm going to be making a video about next week. The next Saturday's video will be about it. And thanks to AI, it helped me generate this tool that helps you calculate Varroa mites and figure out what to do. So you put in um, what period your bees are going through, whether that's like springtime growth, peak, summertime, late summer, post harvest, decreasing, dormant, similar to there's a Varroa mite management tool someone else made. But I thought that tool was great, but also unhelpful. So I wanted to make it more specific so you could put in the exact number of mites you have. And I went through every single possible outcome so that it gave you exactly what I would recommend to people if they told me what they were going through. So are there honey supers present? Is there brood present? What temperature is it outside in the daytime? And what is your hive doing? Is it growing? Is it at its peak? Is it declining? Is it dormant? Is it just about to be going through that dormant winter phase? And are you in a warm climate where you never see cold winters, or are you going to be seeing a cold winter? So keep an eye out for that. I will be putting it out on the newsletter, and it will be going on the YouTube video. If you ever go through this chart and it gives you an answer that you think is terrible, please let me know. Send an email to me. info@beekeepingmadesimple.com works, because it's hard to go through every single possible scenario. But the ones I went through to double check seem to be working okay so far. And so that's what I have on my list for things to talk about. Thank you so much, Jim, for the donation. I really appreciate you. You've been a great student of mine. I hope your bees are doing well. I am jealous. Didn't harvest anything this year. But hopefully next year, because this was a terrible spring. It was very late getting into the season this year. All right, so we have one giveaway. If this is it. It is 2 honeybee costumes. I don't know if you saw the last video I put out, but it had a commercial. And in that commercial, me and my 3-year-old daughter were wearing these matching honeybee costumes. This is on Beezzit's website, beezzit.com. They sell a whole bunch of honeybee themed stuff. This one is an adult size unisex costume, and there is one that fits a 3-year-old. My 3-year-old wore it, and my 6-year-old son wore it, and it fit both of them because it's just like a big, kind of more like a sack thing. My son is very sad that I'm giving this away before he can wear it for Halloween, because he wanted to dress himself up like a skeleton in a bee costume. Was his goal. So I have a number generator somewhere over here, and it's going to generate a number, and whatever number is the one in the comments, that is the person that is going to get the costume. If anybody, this is not only for people within the within the United States of America. You do not have to live on the continental US. Alaska and Hawaii do qualify. And this is thanks to Beezzit. I have a bunch of giveaways. So for the next few months, I'm going to be giving away the honey pot and the bee garden lights and all of the things that were in that commercial as well. Probably not the t-shirt, since I wore it. I don't think anyone wants a t-shirt that I wore. So Oh my goodness. I have to count how many. Let's see. Okay, generate a number. 48. Okay, so let's see. All right, it looks like Jane Hardwick is the one that won the costumes. So Jane, if you want to email me your mailing address, I can send that to you. If you are not interested in the costumes, that is okay. Just let me know and I can donate it to somebody. But like not my son. Or you can give it away to whoever you like. Thank you everyone for joining. It's nice to see you all. And stay tuned for the next week. We'll have another giveaway. I'm also going to be giving away 2 of those queen contraptions. What were they called? The queen cell kits, where you can graft your own queens. So I'll be giving one of those away next month and the month after that as well, which is also, I think, $300 or more in value. Comes with a ton of queen cages and grafting tools and all that fun stuff. So have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you at the next live chat.